Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are so thrilled to have Ashley Stokes joining us today to talk about his new book, Gigantic.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.
Well, we like to start our podcast with a ray of sunshine. So, Sarah, what's something great that happened this week?
Something great that happened this week is the Wheel of Time trailer finally dropped. I have been looking forward to this for a while now, and we got to see it on Thursday, and it looks so good. I am so excited. I can't even.
I haven't read Wheel of Time, so I'm significantly less excited.
No, but I am going to force you to watch the trailer at some point.
Oh, I've seen the trailer, yeah.
Okay. Just as long as you've seen the trailer.
Have you followed that at all, Ashley? I don't know if you've read the series.
I haven't, actually. I'm vaguely aware of what it is.
Yeah.
But, and I was aware that a trailer had dropped, but I haven't read the book or seen the trailer yet.
That's about my level of awareness as well.
Yeah, I mean, the series is 14 books long, so it's a lot. No need to read it if you don't want to. But if you enjoy fantasy shows, I think that the TV show is shaping up to be really good.
Okay. I expect I'll watch the TV show and then see if I fancy reading the books afterwards.
Yeah, that works. My understanding is that there's no need to read the books first. Like, the show will still be accessible to fans or non-fans.
Well, how about you, Ashley? What's something great that happened?
Well, I suppose it's difficult not to mention the fact my book was published.
That is great.
Yes, that counts.
And it has taken 10 years from having the idea, the initial kind of glimpse or throb of wanting to write it, to it coming out this year. So it's difficult to suggest anything has overshadowed that in any sort of way. Culturally, I was quite excited to see that June's got lots of really good reviews. And I'm quite excited about seeing that film now, which I wasn't until the reviews dropped for that. But generally, I've been more obsessed with talking about Gigantopithecus and Bigfoot and 10-year journey into the light out of the trees.
Understandable. And your book came out on the 2nd, right?
It came up on the 2nd, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah.
But you're two of the first people to read it, so I'm quite interested to talk to you as well.
Oh,
I didn't know that. That's exciting.
That is exciting.
Outside of my kind of inner circle, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Well, spoiler alert, we loved it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before we move on to that, what's everyone drinking tonight?
I'm drinking Heineken.
Ah, lovely. We don't get a lot of beer, so it's nice to diversify.
This is what I had in my fridge.
Mm-hmm.
Since the mention of Heineken in David Lynch's Blue Velvet, I've been a fan. Cheers.
I'm not particularly a beer drinker, so I can't speak to that.
Okay,
but cheers.
Cheers. Chin.
How about you, Sarah?
I am drinking some rosé that I probably should have chilled beforehand, but I did not get home in time to think of that. So it's lukewarm, but nice.
Oh, well.
And you, Lily?
I'm drinking iced tea because yesterday was my birthday and I have not gotten on the hair of the dog quite yet. Well, I know my answer for read anything good lately. Gigantic by Ashley. By Ashley Stokes. So that's my answer for that question. But we have a whole podcast coming up about that, so I will wait. How about either of you read anything good lately other than the topic today?
Well, I did quite enjoy reading Gigantic, as I've said. I'm finally back to reading the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, which I had started quite some time ago, and then I had to put down because I was trying to finish Wheel of Time and then juggling that and all of our podcast reading. So I'm finally back to that, and that's lovely.
I've just finished reading The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I don't know if either of you have read that.
Oh, I haven't read it, but I've heard it, or not heard of it. I haven't actually listened to it either.
It's a very, very clever book, and it keeps you guessing right until the kind of last few pages about what it's actually about. So it's a very, very compelling story. I would definitely recommend it if you've not actually read it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, definitely have to check it out.
Well, as we hinted, today we were talking about Gigantic. And you mentioned it took 10 years working on this book, but we noticed that you also do ghostwriting. And so
yes, right.
Can you speak about the different experience of ghostwriting versus working on your own project?
Okay, I've not been ghostwriting for that long.
Okay.
I've been ghostwriting for coming up for 2 years, during which I've worked on about 4 or 5 projects. And each of those projects is different. So there's not a kind of general way of doing it. And I worked on 2 fiction projects. So I'm writing novels for other people, which I didn't think I would ever do. And also I've written memoirs for people and political tracts and this type of things. The difficulty is that you are trying to write and visualize something that's in somebody else's head rather than something that's in your head. So when I write a story, it can be my own cinema, and if I mess it up, I just change it or go with it and see what happens. But when I'm writing for somebody else, I do have to go through a kind of negotiation of trying to work out exactly what they want me to do in what order. And so it's a little bit more like protracted, like I say, a bit slower. Otherwise, it's just simply like writing your own stuff. It takes a while to find the voice. You have to do a certain amount of research to push forward. But generally, in terms of using my skill set, which is quite unusual, it's quite a good thing for me to do. And I do really enjoy it. I suppose there's more of an extra problem solving element to it than when you're writing for yourself.
Do you prefer ghostwriting memoirs or ghostwriting? You said that you are also working on some fiction novels.
I think I'd rather prefer, I think it's easier to ghostwrite non-fiction than fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's just less painstaking. I'm writing a historical novel at the moment. So I have to kind of look up, if I describe somebody's haircut, I have to go and look it up.
Mm-hmm.
If it's my book, then I can just, I can have them have a bouffant, I can have them have a skirt. It doesn't matter. I have to be continually looking at what uniform somebody would wear or what medals they had. And so that's kind of slower. And I suppose when I've only written historical fiction myself, I've always done the research first and then decided I'd like to write a story rather than researching a period. So there is that. But broadly, the process is the same. And if you've been writing for any period of time, you realise that you do have a process or schedule that you go through when you write any kind of story. So you draw off that experience, and yet you're also continually feeding back to your author, to the client or the author, about what they actually want and whether you've done it correctly. So, but in some ways it's more like making a film, that there are more people involved. Mm-hmm. And you're part of a team rather than just being on your own and writing something and seeing what happens with it.
Is there any kind of screening process for projects you take on? There must be, right? Have you ever had to deal with someone completely unreasonable with contradictory edits and all sorts of nonsense?
Not yet, no.
Okay,
not really. No, I haven't found it to be particularly difficult. I haven't worked with any difficult people, and the kind of toing and froing that goes between agency people is probably exactly the same as you get in a publishing company if you're working on a book. Mm-hmm. So generally, it's been quite sedate and quite creative and quite fun.
Very cool.
I have not met any proper ghosts yet. Seen a ghost yet, and that's obviously a big disappointment. But
understandably so.
Yeah.
So there is really an excellent Doctor Who reference in Gigantic, and Doctor Who I'm a big fan. Are you a fan?
Well, I grew up on Doctor Who. And 70s Doctor Who, mm-hmm. which was around when I was a little boy. Tom Baker was Doctor Who. Mm-hmm. And actually, one of my first memories is of seeing a terrifying scene in Doctor Who in the Carnival of Monsters, which came out when I was 3, which haunted me. And when I saw the episode many years later, it's just some rubber-headed monsters waggling about on some butcher's grass. Mm-hmm. But it did really, really frighten me. So it's very much part of my kind of childhood, is mm-hmm. that type of quite unusual British science fiction. I do like the new Doctor Who, the more recent one. And I do think it's necessary to have something that kind of narrative attack and unusual eccentricity on television. So yeah, Doctor Who is in my DNA. I'm not a super fan in the sense of the word, but it is something I refer back to and do often find really funny. And lots of my friends I've got friends who are very, very big kind of Whovians who collect everything and know everything. And it's just part of our conversation is to continually refer to Doctor Who as if it's the Bible.
Well, your novel Gigantic is following an investigator who is trying to find prove the existence of Bigfoot. And I was wondering if you were interested in cryptids before this, or if you had to do a lot of research into the particulars of Bigfoot. Were you interested before, or did the interest come during this process?
I'd been interested in all types of mysteries when I was a little boy, around the same time I was watching Tom Baker in Doctor Who. And it's mentioned quite heavily in the book, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, TV series, which came out when I was 10, I think. And the episode on Bigfoot on that, I do remember being quite kind of intrigued by all these stories. And of course, there is the famous Patterson-Gimlin film from 1968 in Bluff Creek, California, where something that does look like a man in a suit wanders kind of across the trees. So I was interested in it then. But really anything like this stimulates a storytelling instinct in me that it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. The actual story of it is exciting enough on its own. So when I was a child, I was interested in all these things like UFOs, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, Yetis, and then probably put them aside for quite a long time where I tried to be an adult. And
well, don't do that.
What happened really was when I started to write the book and I had the idea and started to get into it, it all came back. And one of the things that came back to me was this business of being obsessed with mysteries when I was between 8 and 12, say. And there is another thing that came back to me, which in the 70s in England, where there was less media and there was only newspapers and 2 or 3 TV stations, the local newspapers and national tabloids and magazine programs would frequently report on paranormal events as if they were news. I do remember very vividly there was one on Nationwide, which used to follow the BBC 6 o'clock news, reported sightings of Satan in the southeast of England. Next, after something about traffic light zoning, followed by, the Satan has been seen 3 or 4 times in various places. Of course, you believe that to be true when you're a child, and you get really frightened. And I don't think the world is quite like that anymore because there's so much more for us to look at. So all that kind of came back to me when I started to think, like, what if there were Bigfoot hunters in my hometown, which was kind of my original starting point. The other thing, I suppose, as well, is that when I had my original idea, I thought I was making it all up. And of course, there are loads of Bigfoot hunters in England, which still makes me fall off my chair. And loads of unusual and strange sightings and this type of thing. So I did have an interest in it. And I do anything that's got that kind of mystery to it does often make raises my hackles and makes me interested. And if Bigfoot's not true, I wish it was.
Do you have a favorite? Is Bigfoot your favorite mystery?
I think so, yeah. I think so. I think one of the reasons why I think it is my favorite is because it's spawned so much lore. You can go on YouTube and see hundreds of fake films of somebody dressed up in a bear suit, filmed with a potato. When you think of other cryptids, there's nothing, it doesn't get added to. Mm-hmm. It's much harder to fake a picture of the Loch Ness Monster than it is of Bigfoot. So I think Bigfoot is, and it's not just the Bigfoot, it is the lore, I think, and the cryptozoologists and why they are so invested in the thing that makes me intrigued. It's also quite alien to us in England because England is small and not wooded. So where it is conceivable that you can have Bigfoot in America or Bigfoot in China or Russia, England has, it's really, really, really possible for a large ape-like creature to go unobserved. There's nothing to observe here. Somebody will be twitching their curls.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Gigantopithecus intelligence team, aka GET, and what seems to be kind of the universal fervor that these kinds of groups tend to develop?
Well, the Gigantopithecus intelligence team has existed since 1988, I think, where its founders, Gorgo Gartrey and Eddie Hogg, filmed a large ape-like creature outside Carrots nightclub in Sutton, which appeared on local television. And when Kevin, who's the protagonist of the novel, sees this, he just becomes completely obsessed by the fact that there's a Bigfoot in Sutton. So those are the founders, Eddie and Gorgo, and they recruit Kevin, and he becomes their kind of most avid fan. And later they're joined by Derek Funnell, who's a cryptozoologist, who's more of a paranormal investigator. And he claims to have solved literally every mystery in the world. And he spent time in the Congo tracking dinosaurs, and he's written a lot of books that nobody can read. And he's the character that most looks like a Doctor Who, basically. There's one line I kind of took out because it was too ornate, but Kevin described him as being the most useless incarnation of Doctor Who, being shagged by a tumbleweed. And Kevin's got quite kind of interesting takes on Derek Funnell. So Derek Funnell's really Kevin's only friend, and yet he's clearly insane. And also perhaps thinks he's Aleister Crowley, he's a Satanist as well as he believes in Bigfoot, and he's solved UFOs and this type of thing. And then later on, when Gorgo retires, he gives much to Kevin's consternation, he gives the leadership of the team to Maxine, who's a science teacher at Kevin's son's school, and she's an arch skeptic. So really, the period that the book takes place, you've got this triangular struggle between Maxine, who doesn't believe it at all, Derek, who believes it's a supernatural event, and Kevin, who thinks it's a natural event, but it's still something, extremely rare. So you can really see how Maxine will get increasingly exasperated by both of these men, ultimately. Yeah. And Kevin by her as well. I mean, they both kind of wind each other up. So that's the kind of dynamic of it. I think with Kevin and Derek, probably, that I give less thought to, because Kevin is more in my head than Derek Funnell. And I don't particularly want Derek Funnell in my head, really. I'm quite happy to sit there a distance. But Kevin has nothing in his life but this obsession. The obsession is the only thing that makes him heroic in his own mind. Kevin does have quite a dark and sort of grim past, and a grim childhood. And the only thing that's lit it up is investing in kind of paranormal culture and science fiction culture to a lesser degree. So the only thing that he has is the fact that he's going to be the man that proves the Notre Gigantopithecus is real. And that's his kind of tragedy. That's his tragic flaw. It does become like a religious faith. And I've seen this with other Bigfoot hunters or cryptozoologists, that it becomes like a religious article that, if I believe in it enough, it will come true.
I have to say, I really loved Arthur C. Dad.
Yes, that was such a good line.
Every time that comes up, it's amazing the moments in this book that made me laugh, even in between the descriptions of, as you said, Kevin's sort of tragic backstory. It all worked together to create a very interesting tone. But you mentioned Maxine, who was possibly my favorite character, and did sort of feel like the reader's voice of reason. Through Maxine, as the reader, we were able to sort of say the things to Kevin that maybe some of us would have wanted to.
Yeah.
Was that always her role?
I think it was always her role. And I think the kind of contrast between the two of them is what makes the novel funny to me, in the scenes, particularly when they're on their own. So she was always supposed to be the rationalist. And the thing as well is she's much more educated than Kevin is, in a way that he doesn't really even understand that that's the case. So them arguing the sort of the toss about, whether the creature is real or not, he's so out of his league that he has to keep lying, basically, to kind of keep in the game. So I'd always intended her to be the straight person. I suppose when I kind of tried to construct her arc, ultimately, that she does actually like what they've done. She does actually like going out in the dark and looking for the Gigantopithecus, and it does change her life. And she goes and does something more kind of ambitious with her own life because she's met Kevin, which probably wasn't what I intended when I started. But she does get to call him an idiot a lot, and and often treats him like he's a big baby in some ways, and he's about to have a tantrum. But they do kind of speak entirely different languages, I think. Kevin is entirely kind of fanatical faith-based language, all surrounding Gigantopithecus. And Maxine is obviously a cool scientist who's, and used to working with children and these sorts of things. Obviously, she's terrified of Derek Funnell as well. So
that seems like a reasonable response.
I imagine that Derek Funnell is quite intimidating to someone who is used to more logic and more grounded in the real world.
Well, yes. This is another thing that I did notice when I was doing some research into cryptozoologists, is that often when Bigfoot hunters in America and in Russia are confronted by the facts, like this hair that you've given me is not from a Yeti, that's DNA from a horse. Then they'll get really angry and then start to move towards a paranormal explanation. So it can change its DNA. And it read your thoughts because it's psychic, and it changed its DNA. So when we had it, it was a Yeti, but now it's a horse. So and Derek Funnell kind of does that kind of role. Whenever Maxine is right, he'll say, well, it used its cloaking technology here to shift into another dimension. That's why it's only got 1 foot.
We haven't mentioned this yet, but the book structure itself is written in sort of an epistolary form, where it's the case report of this group.
Yeah.
And we get to see the same events as written by Maxine and then also by Kevin. It's sort of in response to her report. I really love that format, and having the two different point of views sort of bouncing off of each other was just a really delightful way to experience the story.
There are some where Maxine might write 3 lines about a scene, and Kevin will write pages and pages and pages about what really happened.
Yeah. The truth.
Yeah, the truth, the facts.
Yes.
There was a argument about money, she says, and there's pages and pages about when they try and get that DJ to come on the expedition with them.
Mhm.
But she just says there was an argument about money. But yeah, the book is supposed to be like a dossier that Kevin sends to you through the post. It's like a pile of papers because he's got his 2 letters, one at the beginning and one at the end. You're supposed to send one to you, and then one he's still supposed to send to his son, and then the rest of it you're supposed to sit on it for 3 months until find out whether Kevin comes back. So I did kind of like that idea that it's like a pile of papers. But also originally it was supposed to be a story with footnotes. So it's sort of a short story with footnotes.
Oh, interesting.
So those bits that are Kevin's were supposed to be the footnotes to Maxine's colder report or cooler report. And of course, once I started to write Kevin, it got so long. I had to sort of abandon it being a short story, and then it became a novella, and then it became a novel, and then it does now actually read more like a report than a kind of slightly tricksy story with footnotes. But yeah, it is supposed to be a dirty dossier that you get sent through the post, and you don't know what to do with
it. I wonder what Derek's version of events would be.
Oh, Derek's version of events would obviously be tinged with all sorts of like cosmic horror tinges, and his journey towards his great becoming. Because he does think he's Alistair Crowley. He's the reincarnation of Alistair Crowley, which Maxine does realise, which freaks her out. But Kevin doesn't realise, actually doesn't know who Alistair Crowley is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm sure Derek's would be quite strange, ultimately. I think you need Lovecraft to probably write Derek's version of that.
At least one of our narrators is pretty unreliable, I would say. Do you have a top secret document somewhere that has the facts? Or has this story always, I guess we know it hasn't always existed through Kevin's eyes now, but do you have a secret, the truth?
No, I never wrote it out from, I did always knew that it was going to be what it is, mm-hmm. But there is a massive twist. So I suppose I wrote it with that in mind. But in terms of all the lore and everything, then I just assumed that Kevin believed anything.
Yeah.
He just wants to believe it. So between him and Derek Funnell, they just make anything up and it becomes the truth. Mm-hmm. So that's how kind of what the lore is. It gives you like you're just mainlining Kevin's imagination when you read that. So there are some key facts, I suppose, that I did know are part of the story. And I suppose I did need to work out what the other side was up to, mm-hmm. and why they'd been doing it. But really, I didn't really write any sort of parallel timelines or anything and just work out, well, Kevin saw this and Kevin saw that. I did think at one point I might like to write more of those reports because it's supposed to be report 214. So there's 213 other reports that Kevin's written of seeing the Gigantopithecus, which could be quite funny. But if I had all the time in the world, I'd probably write a separate handbook of Git.
I would read that.
Yeah, everything the Git has achieved in its time. So there was some kind of frame things which I knew the plot depended on, that Kevin's interpretation of it would have to be radically different. But I did also, once I started to write Kevin, I realised he makes everything up. And if he's presented with an alternative version, he just makes something else up. There are numerous occasions in the book, for example, where he does something to Maxine, which he just thinks that she's not going to notice. Of course, she notices straight away. It's so unsubtle. But like at the beginning where he tries to pick up Derek Funnell when she's told him not to. But he just tries to make it he's not doing that when he clearly is. So yeah, so I kind of want him to be like an exasperating person to be around, and maybe also the sort of person that could start an argument in a field on his own.
Well, all right, Sarah, before we move on to our spoiler conversation, why should you read this book?
You should read this book if you enjoy cryptids, if you think cryptids are interesting, if you like the sound of an epistolary format and like seeking the truth behind an unreliable narrator. And if you enjoy humor, because this book has quite a lot of humor to it.
Definitely. Yeah. If you like Bigfoot in any way, definitely read this book. Or any sort of that mystery solving, UFOs, any sort of cryptid. I think this book really captures the emotions behind those people very well.
Fact.
To avoid spoilers for Gigantic, skip to 4110. All right, and now we can discuss how sort of heartbreaking this book is. I had to take a minute after I finished it to sort of download how that ended.
I wasn't expecting, just beyond the fact that Kevin has a really kind of traumatic childhood, as you've mentioned, it also ends really tragically.
It does end really tragically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The end is really sad, actually, when I think about it. I did want to steer clear of having a kind of sentimental ending. And I do think in some ways Kevin and Derek are kind of dangerous individuals. And they're a danger to them. They're kind of a danger to themselves. So the fact they kind of go on, and I've often thought as well that Kevin is in a loop, that he needs this fantasy to exist. So once at the end, he has the opportunity of existing without it when it's been proved to him that it's not real, that he has been hoaxed. And yet, really, Derek convinces him that we need to keep doing this. This is all another hoax.
Yeah.
The hoax is another form of hoax. The seed of that actual idea in the book is when Kevin's talking about Arthur C. Dad. When I went back to look at that Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, the Missing Apes episode, Arthur C. Clarke is really, really, really skeptical and tells you they don't exist. So Kevin has to interpret that. He's giving me a secret message that they do exist.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what happens to him at the end. Well, as I was editing the book and working with an editor, there was a lot of talk about trying to make this story about fatherhood. It's about Kevin's desire to be a father, and maybe in chasing the Gigantopithecus, he's looking for his lost father or his lost manhood or masculinity in some sense, or his sense of Kevin's masculinity. And I was quite resistant to that because I think it's actually about childhood, and actually Kevin is trapped by his childhood. And I think adult life is far too difficult for him and painful for him. And he hasn't got the emotional equipment to deal with adult life. So he has to remain as the child adventurer. Mm-hmm. And that's tragic. It is really tragic, but so that's where it goes.
So it kind of sounds like there was never a time when you were thinking that it might end otherwise, that he might choose family.
He might choose
or
family.
His career. Yeah.
I never ever thought that he would, actually. Mm-hmm. I did always think him and Derek Farnell would go up the mountain. I suppose, and in that kind of scene at the end where he is, dithering, and he makes some mature decisions in that. Like he can't go back to his wife because he knows he's not in love with her when he is in love with Maxine, who's never going to go with him. So I didn't want him to kind of make some sort of sloppy decision like that. Mm-hmm. But I'd never really thought that the ending for me was that he'd be reunited with his children or his child, and they would go and play bowling or go squatching again, or any of that. I'm not sentimental enough to think that was it. But I think actually I'm hoping that this is a more emotionally impactful ending. Mm-hmm. It being kind of traditional, kind of happy ending. Probably if I sell it to Hollywood, it will change.
Something I loved about this book is maybe because I'm unfamiliar with, maybe there's a summary that I would have told me, but while I was reading it, I was completely invested in the two different options, or this multiple different options of what could be. I didn't know if at any moment this book was going to turn into Bigfoot does exist and they found him. And there is that moment where both characters truly believe they found Bigfoot. And I was invested. I thought that could be the case. Yeah. And then, of course, it gets switched on me. But I had a similar experience with the ending. Each time one of these options was presented to Kevin, I was right there in that moment. Like, which one is he going to choose? It could go truly any direction. And that is an experience I don't think you get from stories very often. Of course, the good guy's going to win, but the true mystery, I think, was really, really compelling and very well done.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's always been quite felt like a very risky thing for me to write because it's so unusual that it is so kind of nice to hear that people have invested in it, because Kevin's a really odd character. Mm-hmm. He does odd things. And I've written about a place that no one's heard of, even in England.
Yeah.
So it's nice to feel that Kevin is on a real journey.
I think there's something really compelling about his story. And even as much as you want it to be a happy ending, it's in some ways more, I don't want to say more satisfying that it's not, but it feels very, very true to what would actually happen.
Yeah, I like endings that are sobering in some ways, that make you a little bit humble before, like it's catharsis, really. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it is quite a stiff ending. I also, I don't think it would be true to who Kevin really is if I allowed him to go back and be the very good IT guy.
I have to ask, feel free to not answer. they're in a pretty dangerous situation at the end of the book. I think it mentioned that they get shot at the day before
Yes.
or
Yeah.
towards. And so it's kind of a cliffhanger in that way. Do they make it?
Well, I think I'll leave that up to you.
Okay, fine.
As Kevin says at the end, two nutters from Sutton are going to climb a mountain without any equipment that no one's ever climbed, that's sacred to the locals.
Yeah.
Then, you know, it's a tall order. It's a tough one. But I haven't actually obviously gone to the end, but that's the last anybody hears of Kevin is that letter. So yeah, it is up to you. I suppose there's always been open for the sequel where Derek and Kevin go through the portal and they end up in the alternative dimension with the Bigfoot and the lizard men, all the people that they think are out there, and come back as like heroes, and everyone in Sutton will be chatting, you know, in the chair. We're clapping them and everything. But yeah, it does end on a kind of cliffhanger. But it is quite a task that they're going for.
Well, I hope they make it.
Well, I hope they make it as well. Yeah.
Speaking of mysteries, do you know who Kevin's father is? Or is it just a truly unknown fact?
It is actually an unknown fact to me, because I don't think even Kevin's mother knows who Kevin's father is. Because Kevin's mother is a really, really strict Jehovah's Witness. So whatever's happened to her, even Kevin realizes it's probably quite dark. And he doesn't really want to know. And he never asked, and she never told him, and then she dies. So she's obviously a very, very traumatized woman in her own way, as well as being sort of this intrinsically religious person that stops him from enjoying boyish things. So again, I think it's a mystery that's up to you, really. But I don't really know. But I think in earlier versions, Kevin kind of did know who his father was, and he's just some bloke who ran away. But that was before Kevin's mother was so religious. And that's quite a late thing. There was 9 versions of this story, and I think it's only in the last one that his mother was a Jehovah's Witness, which is the missing link that made Kevin make more sense. Is that side of it. So I don't actually know. So it could just be like the milkman, or it could be Satan. I mean, it is, you know, again, it's one of those mysteries that's kind of left. It's kind of best left unexplored, I think. But obviously, not having a father does impact Kevin's relationship with Arthur C. Clarke, and also Gorgo Gartry, who brings him into the team in the first place, who's not a very good role model, ultimately, for Kevin.
Oh, gosh. That reveal was, speaking of tragic, that hurt me a little bit, finding out that he'd been laughing at his expense. The closest thing he has to a sort of role model was laughing at his expense the whole time. Poor Kevin. He needs a hug.
Poor Kevin, yeah. And then Kevin has to kind of work out that he didn't really hoax him. He was doing it for a higher cause. And
right. Well, because the alternative is too painful.
Alternative is too painful. That's right. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the friction between science and magical thinking between the members of GIT? We touched on this a little bit earlier with sort of Maxine and Derek as the two polar opposites.
It really is that kind of triangle between, you know, pure reason, sort of reason, and paranormal, supernatural, magical thinking. And I think it's that gives the group its energy between which is like a small group of people, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So even though Kevin needs Derek, he also doesn't believe that most of the things that Derek says, but he says so to Maxine because it's better to believe that than what Maxine tells him, which would, of course, him to crumble in the same way lots of things would. So really, there's not much to add to that, what I've already said. But I did realise very much so from when I started to do more research that amongst the Bigfoot community, the idea of science is the conspiracy against them, that they all believe scientists are sitting on the facts and the proof because the government wants to use Bigfoot for military purposes, or they want to conceal them for some kind of reason. And they have all the evidence, but they're just not going to hand it over. So I kind of began to build those things into it. So always really, almost that conception, because I did conceive those 3 characters and Gorgo at the same time, that they were always going to be in this triangular struggle. Mm-hmm. And Kevin ultimately has to choose between them, doesn't he? He has to choose between Derek and Maxine. And if he chooses Maxine, he's going to go back to his wife and be the very good IT guy, ultimately. Or perhaps be her butler, which is also his other fate, is being Maxine's butler, which, I'm not sure. See, Derek, he would rather be Derek Funnell's butler. and carry his bags and carry Maxine's. So that was always my kind of thinking. It does also have that kind of, like, Maxine doesn't know everything, but she's very, very well informed. Kevin doesn't know anything and he knows everything.
Yeah.
So he's like a Dunning-Kruger exhibitionist on that kind of score. Everything he knows is really from reading paranormal blogs and dodgy books rather than and the Daily Mail, rather than having a degree in primate behaviour, which Maxine has.
Just that dynamic between the investigators and the concept of science, especially for Kevin, whose goal is to prove that Bigfoot is real. He needs science in order to do that, but is also so resistant towards it. That tension and that conflict was very enjoyable, very cool.
Well, he needs to own science like it's a pub fight, doesn't he? He needs to own it and incorporate it into Kevin. So science will do what Kevin says, like it's a dog that needs to be tamed. So he does need it, and he does believe that he's like a special naturalist. I think he says at one point, I'm more of a naturalist, like cyborg. Maxine, he calls a cyborg, than Derek, who is, a paranormal investigator, cryptozoologist.
You mentioned that there were 9 different versions of this book. What is maybe one of the biggest changes from its original conception to the version we see today?
So there's 2 main things that happened over this process. And one is entirely kind of formal. It's that it was a short story about 8,000 words with the report with the Kevin comments in footnotes. And then straightening that out so it became a novel that you could read in sequence took a lot of fiddling about with. Because in the original versions of it, Kevin is just responding to what she says. He isn't actually telling a story. So I do have to do quite a lot of massage and rewriting and chopping and changing to get it into the order that it's in. And then really throughout the rest of the draft, there's always been a conflict of how sympathetic Kevin is. So my original Kevin was much more shouty. And the book was really about shouting. And as it's developed, it's become more of this kind of family story and more of a rite of passage story, and less of a story that perhaps invites you to laugh at Kevin for shouting all the time. So those are the main 2 things. So like I was just mentioning before, the idea of his mother's religious background is quite late in the day. And that involved quite a lot of tinkering with Kevin. So my original Kevin and Maxine just really argued like cat and dog continually. And that could possibly become a little bit boring. Mm-hmm. Or just a bit like, it's a bit like sort of a sitcom where these two characters are bound to kind of fated to shout at each other forever. So I sort of tempered all that as I went. And then there is also this decision, is this a story about fatherhood or is it a story about childhood? And I plumped towards it being childhood's end.
That's so interesting to me to hear you say that, because one of the aspects of this book that hit me particularly as heartbreaking is how really wounded Kevin is because of his lack of father, but then how he has created that same situation for his son, and that sort of tragic mirroring of his own situation.
Yeah, he doesn't realize he's done it either.
Yeah,
because he wants to give his son the childhood that he didn't have, which involves going out into the woods and looking for Bigfoot. And at the beginning of the story, Kevin reveals he can't see his son anymore because his wife has put her foot down. And that's because he took the son out and they went Bigfoot hunting. He left this kid in the van while he went out, thought he heard something. He didn't come back for hours. The kid got really, really frightened. So he does actually repeat the same kind of situation, but he doesn't mean to.
Right.
And one of his things always is, if I just prove that I'm right, then everyone will leave me alone and we can all be together. The only thing I do think is that his son is to me a much stronger person than Kevin is, because Boguslava, Kevin's wife, is a much better mother than Kevin's is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so he has decided that Kevin is embarrassing him, and he's decided to, he's made that decision. So he's a stronger and clear-headed boy. Mm-hmm. But I suppose he is also kicking off at school, isn't it? Because Kevin has to go to school, and that's when he meets Maxine, is because Maxine is thinking that the other boys are laughing at Kirillov because of Kevin. So yeah, but you're right though. He has committed the same kind of situation, created the same kind of situation, though for completely different reasons.
Mm-hmm. And almost through an ironic twist, by trying to avoid that, he has created it.
He has created that, yes. Yeah.
I thought it was so interesting how the issue wasn't that Kevin took his son Bigfoot hunting. The issue was that he was so single-mindedly focused on Bigfoot that he went too far with it, right? It was abandoning his son that was the problem, to go run off after Bigfoot, not just the fact that he took him at all. And so I just want to shake him and say, you could have done this correctly. It didn't have to be this way.
Yeah, he loses all track of time once he gets in that kind of like, I'm the hunter, I'm the tracker kind of mindset as well. And if you've been to Chipstead Downs, where this adventure is supposed to take place, it's such a small area that Kevin kind of he has to kind of reimagine the world to exist in these kind of thing. But yeah, no, he just took the boy camping, really, didn't they? And he didn't and he didn't really hear anything either. It's so it's all part of the tragic life of Kevin Stubbs.
Do you think that we'll ever get more Kevin Stubbs stories? Either, like you were saying, if you had more time, you would write out some of the earlier reports.
I don't know whether it would be fun to write out some of the earlier reports, because some of them did sound quite exciting in the book. They could a greater thing. I certainly wouldn't want to write any kind of sequel, because I do think the end is the end. I want to kind of build on that. So whether I, even if I just did it for a bit of a laugh and had it on a website or something to write some GIT reports from the past, that could be. I would rather do that if I was going to extend the Kevin universe.
And what a universe that is.
Universe, yeah.
Were there any particular words that you, like, specific to cryptozoology or cryptids, that you found odd or interesting while writing this book?
Well, there's a whole language of Bigfoot hunters. So there's things like blobsquatch, which is a photograph where it's just a blob. Is. So, oh no, it's blobsquatch. And I kind of pick up things like that. And there's also this other phrase which you also get in ghosts. In YouTube shoots of real ghost stuff, is like filmed with a potato, because nobody ever takes a film of a Bigfoot or a ghost where it's clear, is it? It's always like it's filmed underwater or in a snowstorm or something. You really can't tell what it is. So film with a potato is something I definitely picked up, and blobsquatch is probably one of the best words ever, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a good word.
You reminded me of the scene when Kevin is trying to film Bigfoot and he purposefully shakes the camera because he says that will make it more authentic.
Yeah.
That was just so incredible.
Most YouTube films of Bigfoot or ghosts, you see something, the person immediately puts the camera on the ground and then runs around. So blobsquatch is a good one, I think.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm going to Google that right now. I want to see.
Yeah.
I'm going to start using that in my everyday conversations.
Yeah, there's a blobsquatch over there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what a blobsquatch.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a great time talking to you about this very cool book.
Very much for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really glad you enjoyed the book.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Heartbreaking, but wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit, like, are you working on any current projects that you can talk about just a little bit, or?
The fact that this came out 2 days ago makes that feel like a mean question.
It kind of does.
You're allowed to have a victory lap. It's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've been working on a series of short stories that have become a sequence of short stories. And one of the concepts in these that runs through these stories, a haunted book, a cursed book. And that ends up being the book you're actually reading.
Ooh.
Oh.
So that's kind of what I've been doing. Some of those stories have already been published. But I wrote 4, and then I started to kind of link them together. And then I kind of created a pandemic-style event called The Great Disorder. And so we have before, during, and after stories. So I think I have 3 of those to complete, and I'll finish that book. But I'm sort of toying with the idea of creating a kind of extended universe with the same kind of concepts feeding through. But these are more kind of straight stories, and they're not comic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm now starting to wonder whether I should write more kind of comic voices, more like Kevin. But I could probably never come up with a character like Kevin again.
He's one of a kind.
He really is.
So if I get a comic idea, I'll probably try to write another short comic idea, but it won't take me 10 years. But at the moment, I'm working on a few kind of concepts around the cursed book and a haunted wood and things like this, which is quite good fun.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. And where can we find you on the internet to follow you and keep up with these books when they come out?
Okay, well, probably the best place to keep in contact with me is on Twitter, where I'm on at Ashley J. Stokes. And I'm also on at Ashley J. Stokes on Instagram. I do have a website, which is www.ashleystokes.net. And I'm also on Facebook. Those are the best places to keep up with me at the moment.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again, and can't wait for the next one.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really, really honoured to be on your podcast.
It was our pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you. I'll have some more Heineken.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.